Ronald worked as a gas station attendant and janitor for most of his life. He drove a used car. He wore the same coat for years, held together near the end with a safety pin. He lived in the same modest house in Brattleboro, Vermont for decades. He never complained about money. He never talked about money. When Ronald died in 2014 at the age of 92, he left behind $8 million. Most of it went to a local library and a hospital. Nobody saw it coming. Not his neighbors. Not the staff at the hospital where he volunteered. Not even reportedly some members of his own family. Meanwhile, across the country, physicians, people who spent a decade in school, who carry crushing student debt, who earn on average $200,000 to $300,000 a year, are filing for bankruptcy at rates that would surprise you. A 2019 survey by Medscape found that 56% of physicians reported feeling financially stressed, not uncomfortable, stressed. Doctors, the people we trust with our lives. So how does a janitor die with $8 million while a doctor can't cover his credit card bill? That question isn't really about income. It never is. Here's what most personal finance content gets wrong. It treats wealth as a math problem. Earn more, spend less, invest the difference. And yes, on paper, that works. The formula is simple. The execution for most people is not, because money is not a math problem. Money is a psychology problem dressed up as math. Ronald didn't stumble into $8 million. He made quiet, consistent decisions over 50 years, almost invisibly. He invested in dividend stocks. He reinvested those dividends. He let time do what time does. He was not special. He was not a genius. By all accounts, he was a pleasant, unremarkable man who happened to understand one thing that most people, regardless of education, regardless of income, never quite grasp. The size of the gap between what you earn and what you spend matters more than what you earn. That gap is not about sacrifice. It's about identity. The physician problem has a name in behavioral finance. It's called lifestyle inflation, and doctors are perhaps its most dramatic case study. Here's how it works. You spend your 20s in school accumulating debt, deferring every comfort. You're told implicitly, culturally, by the system that trained you, that the reward is coming. That once you finish your residency, once you're finally doctor named, the life you deferred will begin. And it does. Suddenly. A salary that feels enormous arrives, and it arrives all at once. The brain, wired to seek relief from long deprivation, interprets this as permission. The BMW lease is signed. The house in the right neighborhood is purchased. The vacations happen, the wardrobe upgrades, the private school tuitions, and before the ink is dry on the first attending contract, a physician earning $280,000 a year can be living a life that costs $260,000 a year, with $400,000 in student loans still outstanding. The math, which looked so clean on paper, collapses. A Federal Reserve report from 2022 found that 37% of Americans, if faced with an unexpected $400 expense, could not cover it without borrowing or selling something. That's not just low-income households. That number cuts across income brackets in ways that should make us deeply uncomfortable. Ronald never earned more than $25,000 a year at his peak. He also never believed, not for a single day it seems, that his income entitled him to a particular kind of life. That distinction is everything. There's a concept that psychologists call the hedonic treadmill, the observed tendency for humans to return to a baseline level of happiness regardless of positive or negative changes in their circumstances. You get the raise. You feel better. 6 months later, the raise is normal. You need another one. The treadmill doesn't stop. It speeds up. Most high earners don't realize they've stepped on it until they're running just to stay still, earning more, spending more, saving nothing, feeling vaguely anxious about money in a way they can't quite explain because explaining it would require admitting something uncomfortable. Ronald never stepped on the treadmill, not because he lacked ambition, but because he never confused his income with his worth or his lifestyle with his identity. That's a harder thing to teach than compound interest. By the end of this video, you'll see something that most financial content doesn't show you. The moment where two people with wildly different incomes make the same decision, and how that one decision determines everything that comes after. It's not the decision you think it is. It's not about stocks. It's not about budgets. It's about something much quieter and much more difficult. Let's talk about Dr. James. He's not a cautionary tale. He's actually one of the rare ones who figured it out, which is exactly why his story is worth telling. Dr. James is an emergency medicine physician who, in his early 30s, realized something that most of his colleagues never do. He was earning a doctor's salary and building a janitor's net worth, not because he was irresponsible, not because he was foolish, but because nobody, not medical school, not residency, not any of the institutions that trained him for a decade, had ever taught him anything about money. He went on to build one of the most widely read personal finance platforms for physicians in the country. But here's the part that stays with you. In his first year as an attending physician, Dr. James and his wife made a deliberate choice not to inflate their lifestyle. They kept living like residents, modestly, carefully, while their income had just tripled. That one decision, held for just 3 years, changed the trajectory of their financial life entirely. 3 years. Now let's look at what the data actually says about this pattern. Because Ronald and Dr. James are not anomalies. They're illustrations of something that research has been documenting for decades. A landmark study published in the Journal of Economic Psychology found that savings rate, not income, is the single strongest predictor of long-term wealth accumulation, not investment returns, not salary growth, the percentage of income that never gets spent. This sounds obvious. It isn't, because savings rate is a behavioral metric, not a financial one. It measures your relationship with money, not your access to it. The same study found that individuals with incomes in the top quartile but low savings rates consistently underperformed over a 20-year horizon compared to individuals in the middle income bracket with high savings rates. A person earning $80,000 a year and saving 25% of it will, mathematically reliably, accumulate more wealth over 30 years than a person earning $200,000 a year and saving 5%. That's not motivation, that's arithmetic. Fidelity's research on its own account holders, one of the largest data sets of real investor behavior in the world, found something quietly devastating. Their best performing accounts over long periods of time were disproportionately held by people who had forgotten they had them, not people who actively managed their portfolios, not people who rebalanced quarterly or tracked every market movement, people who set up automatic contributions and then, through death, neglect, or simply a busy life, left the account alone. The data pivot here is worth sitting with. Inactivity outperformed activity. The investors who did less made more. Ronald would not have been surprised by this. He held some of his stocks for decades. He didn't panic in 2001. He didn't panic in 2008. He just held. That's not passive investing. That's a philosophy, a quiet, almost a stubborn belief that time is the asset most people waste trying to outsmart the market. Here's where the psychological layer becomes impossible to ignore. A 2018 study from researchers at Harvard and the University of British Columbia found that spending on experiences rather than material goods produces longer lasting satisfaction, but only when the experience doesn't require ongoing maintenance of a lifestyle to sustain it. In other words, the vacation makes you happier than the BMW, but the vacation paid for with anxiety, debt, or the knowledge that you can't really afford it. That erases the benefit entirely. The broke doctor isn't unhappy because he bought the BMW. He's unhappy because the BMW means something. It signals arrival, status, the validation of years of sacrifice. And that meaning is borrowed. It depreciates faster than the car. Ronald's coat, held together with a safety pin, meant something too. It meant he had no performance to maintain, no audience to satisfy, no lifestyle that required defending. There is a kind of freedom in that which no salary can buy. The behavioral mirror here is direct. Think about the last significant purchase you made, not the practical ones, the aspirational ones. Ask yourself, were you buying the thing or were you buying what you believed the thing would signal about you? Because if it's the second one, and research suggests for most people it usually is, then you're not managing a budget. You're managing an identity, and identity is far more expensive. Here's the contrast that completes the picture. At 38, Ronald had no debt, a paid-off house, and a modest portfolio growing quietly in the background. At 38, the average American physician has $200,000 in student loan debt, a mortgage in the top 10% of their zip code, 2 car payments, and a net worth that, despite years of high income, is frequently negative. The physicians spent their 30s building a life that looked like wealth. Ronald spent his 30s building wealth. Those are not the same thing. And the gap between them, the gap between the appearance of wealth and the accumulation of it, is where most of America quietly lives, not in poverty, not in abundance, in performance. So what do Ronald and Dr. James actually have in common? Not income, not education, not background. One grew up working class and never left. The other spent a decade in medical training and nearly lost everything to the life he thought he'd earned. What they share is a single, quiet decision made at different points in their lives under completely different circumstances that most people never make. They decided to stop performing, not forever, not dramatically, not with a manifesto or a lifestyle overhaul. They simply stopped spending money to manage how other people perceived them. Ronald wore the same coat. Dr. James kept living like a resident. Both of them, in their own way, chose invisibility over image, and invisibility, it turns out, compounds. Here's the one shift worth taking from this video. Not a budget, not an investment strategy, not a savings percentage target. Just a question. One you can ask before any significant financial decision. Am I buying this, or am I buying what I want this to say about me? That's it. Not a judgment, not a rule, just a pause. A moment of honest accounting that most financial systems never ask you to do, because the entire consumer economy depends on you never stopping to ask it. The research from the Journal of Consumer Research is consistent on this point. Purchasing decisions made primarily for social signaling, even unconsciously, produce shorter satisfaction cycles, require escalation to maintain the same emotional return, and correlate strongly with lower long-term savings rates. In plain language, buying things to impress people is expensive, temporary, and self-reinforcing. You already knew this. The hard part is catching yourself doing it in real time. Ronald left $8 million to a library and a hospital. He didn't do it to be remembered. He didn't do it for legacy branding or a wing named after him. There's no indication he did it for any particular reason at all, other than that he had it and he thought those places could use it. There's something almost unbearably simple about that. A man who never earned much, who never needed much, who never became much by the standards that the culture uses to measure becoming, and who, at the end of a quiet life, turned out to have built something that outlasted nearly everyone who outearned him. The wealthiest thing Ronald ever owned wasn't in his portfolio. It was the complete absence of a need to prove anything. If this made you look at your own spending differently, not with guilt, but with curiosity, take one moment today and ask yourself where the performance is showing up in your financial life. Not to punish yourself for it, just to see it clearly. Drop the words, "still here," in the comments if you're choosing wealth over image. It tells me you're part of the small group of people who actually get it, and it helps me know this kind of content is worth making more of. See you next week.